For many Ukrainians and for many Orthodox Christians, this Easter week has been quite a road to Calvary. The Ukrainian authorities are openly attacking the Orthodox Church, banning church services, shutting down Orthodox places of worship, and engaging in the kind of persecution that Ukraine has not seen for a very long time. Why is it happening? Where does this lead? To make sense of it all, I am joined today by Metropolitan Leonid of Klin, Patriarchal Exarch of Africa. Your Grace, thank you very much for joining us. Let me start by asking you, how did we even get to this point? Why are we regressing back to the times of religion persecution?
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. The subject you brought up is as poignant as it is tragic. We're having this conversation on Holy Week, the final week of Great Lent. It's Tuesday, and with every passing day, the developments in Ukraine produce more and more misery. It pains us, as these are our brothers and sisters. The other day, I posted a video on my Telegram channel showing two elderly women, one of them very old and using a walking stick, making their way towards the church through a crowd of Nazis, young people chanting, "Down with Muscovite priests." The frenzied state these people were in, it wasn't just unnatural, it was outright satanic, demonic. Yes, a demonic fervour and a vitriolic hate for everything Russian, everything Orthodox. To understand the cause of all of this, I believe we have to look deeper into the past, before the developments of these recent years. In my mind, we are dealing with the aftermath of certain ideas that have not been completely stamped out in the 1940s, 50s and 1960s. It is the Ukrainian Banderite ideology which managed to survive in a latent form, slowly poisoning the minds and memories of generations, and it's now sprouting and bearing fruit. I do not think that 1 or 2 or even 3 years would have been enough time to rewrite the minds of young men and women, of thousands of people. Yes, that's the unfortunate reality we are seeing. Priests are physically assaulted, temples are seized, and as we all know, this persecution is directed against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. What a tragic period this is, truly. And yet, here we are, witnessing the acute phase of this tragedy unfold on Holy Week. We will continue to monitor the situation as it develops, but my wish is that it stopped. As I see it, the West is also adding fuel to the fire. All these terrible things are happening with their tacit consent. They are outright ignoring this genocide, and I do believe the word is warranted here. We can trace it all back to the 2000s, with the active phase happening since 2014, when a genocide was unleashed against the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine. And now it's got so bad that people are willingly destroying everything that used to bind our two peoples together. I, for one, don't think they will succeed.
As if trying to prove your point, a representative of the State Department stated yesterday that the US is not aware of any persecution of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, that they know nothing about it, and that they see nothing wrong with it. Russia's foreign ministry has already issued a response. So my question is, why on earth are they turning a blind eye to this all? After all, the West is always so vocal about religious freedoms. Every year they issue reports on freedom of religion worldwide, denouncing Russia for allegedly refusing all faiths and denominations the right to practice their religion. How then can they ignore such violations in Ukraine?
It is like they say, might makes right. The US and its satellites, the so-called collective West, have long since lost touch with reality. Even now they refuse to let go of their perceived victory in the Cold War. For Russia, the legal successor of the Soviet Union, things were tough in the 1990s and in the years that followed. But we managed to get our act together. And now we stand firm, a stronger, more mature nation. We now have a clear sense of dignity and self-worth. And I feel we should continue to instill these ideas in our people and defend them. For our own sake, above all, because the things happening in Ukraine, the trends we see across Western nations, that's something which clearly must not be allowed into Russia. We Russians have already had our fair share of turmoil and godlessness. And let me tell you, it was an ugly experience. And one more thing, no country on earth has unleashed more wars and conflicts, killing millions of people, than the United States and its vassals in their 280-plus year history. What can we say about Yugoslavia then? What can we say about Iraq, Libya, Syria? I can keep this list going. Vietnam, Afghanistan. I can go on forever, listing countries that the USA and the NATO bloc invaded, uninvited, wreaking havoc and killing peaceful people. Just recently, there was an anniversary of the invasion in Iraq, where the civilian population was exterminated and no one was held accountable. As for what was happening in Soviet times, when the BBC, CNN and Voice of America were saying that there were no religious freedoms in the USSR. Indeed, those freedoms were absent. There were threats from Khrushchev to show the last priest on TV. We remember those threats very well. The church had to survive, and it did survive. After the renaissance of the 1990s, it lives now and has a voice of its own. What voice America has now, we can see very well. There is a real battle going on. While we call it a special military operation, where our brothers and sisters are fighting now in the historical sense, it is a war of civilizations. The West is trying to teach us alien values that destroy humans, destroy them as the creation of God. These values are alien, unacceptable to us. Since childhood, we were taught a completely different doctrine regarding saving our souls, regarding morality, decency, and attitude towards each other. The West, though, is trying to paint a whole different picture for us. Well, friends, do as you wish. It's up to you to be leading entire nations into the fires of hell, probably wishing them extinction. You talk about gender issues, lack of maternity, parent one and parent two, as the Holy Patriarch said in his recent sermon, and a completely unacceptable, for a normal person, understanding of social life and so on. No, we don't need values like these. We live by our own principles and our own values. It is over these civilizational values that a war is being waged now. A war for people's souls and their right for sovereign existence and living.
At the same time, Ukraine claims to be restoring the Kievan Rus, to be the direct descendant of the Kievan Rus. They say that one day they will restore it. Yet at the same time, we hear from Ukrainian authorities, officials and clergy that Russians are second-grade people, the Rusnya, as they say. How does it all relate? On the one hand, we see Russian people being killed and oppressed. On the other hand, it's covered up with ideas of imperial grandeur and restoration of historical memory. What is wrong with this historical memory that Ukraine is now peddling?
I think instead it's a simple case of double standards. When you take something from people and give them something in return, you have to justify somehow what you're giving them. These days we hear Nazi fascist slogans like Ukraine above all and there's no other way. That's similar to how things were developing in the late 1930s in Germany and Austria. We remember only too well how that played out and how many millions of casualties it cost the entire civilized world. But it's a very convenient strategy in that it can be very quickly restored. This is a reason why I remembered the 1950s and 1960s, when Bandera guerrillas were hunted down in Ukrainian forests and swamps. Some of them successfully pretended later to be common Soviet citizens. Unfortunately, the 1990s were a terrible time when we lost several generations, in a spiritual sense of the word, something that nobody wants to repeat today. In my subjective view, the West is pumping up Ukraine with ideology that's falling on a very fertile ground. They know very well what buttons to push to turn Ukraine and the Ukrainians into an anti-Russian platform and to make two peoples kill each other. We know very well that many believers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, not the pseudo-Orthodox hellhole created at the instigation of the US through their Greek vassal patriarch, who gave the Ukrainian Orthodox Church his worthless tomos, a piece of paper that means absolutely nothing. And when the time comes, the Council of the Orthodox Churches, or a meeting, a convention, whatever you call it, will take place when the Patriarch will have to answer some very inconvenient questions. If he fails to answer them, he'll have to be tried. He'll have to go on trial for failing to bring peace to everyone, everywhere in Ukraine, as he claimed was his mission. Instead, he only deepened the division and discord that has led to bloodshed. Priests are being killed, parishioners are denied their constitutional right to practice the faith of their choice, such as the Orthodox faith. And it is with regret that we must acknowledge that it will only get worse. As of today, this situation has no solution, and it's escalating to a catastrophe. And I believe that the current Ukrainian state, with its Nazi-coloured ideology and its zealousness, has no future.
At the same time, as far as I know, Ukraine has claimed that its departure from the canonical Orthodox faith is dictated by its desire to join the European community. Even back in the 90s, Ukraine admitted that Orthodox faith was the only really strong link between Ukraine and Russia and other brotherly nations. And those who sought to join Europe were also seeking to destroy that connection. Given everything we're now seeing in Ukraine, and with such values, how real is it for it to actually join the European community? Does Europe need Ukraine with what it has to offer?
Well, right now, half of Ukraine's population is living in Europe. I know a lot of people, including some friends, who live in different countries of Europe, and we're getting different accounts here. Ukrainians are treated in Europe as second-rate and even third-rate citizens. A negative attitude towards them will only increase with time. There's nothing that can fix this, because it's about a huge difference in mentality, education and life values. It's totally impossible to comprehend what kind of future the present Ukrainian government is trying to build for its nation. The authorities, guided and funded by the Western coalition, whose ideas they channel, throw millions of people into a furnace of horrible events. We have to think about the future. People who say that they value the Ukrainian genetic pool must be aware of what is actually happening. You can't feed the people with propaganda all the time, using Russia as an excuse. Russia defined its stance a long time ago. If Russia had followed the example set by the US and NATO with their so-called interventions in other countries, there would have been millions of casualties. But we consider Ukrainians our brothers and sisters. That's why there is no carpet bombing, no strikes against central locations. Russian soldiers sacrifice their lives for the lives of Ukrainian citizens. No wars are fought that way. I'm not a military expert, but I've spoken to many officers and commanders. They've explained to me how this should have been done in accordance with regular combat principles if we wanted a quick victory. Russia would have achieved that, but at what cost?
A de-Russification campaign has been launched in Ukrainian society. For example, services in Orthodox churches are now to be conducted only in Ukrainian. The Russian language should never be used. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is banned in many regions. How logical are these steps? Do they make any sense in such a society?
You can't find logic in Ukrainian society right now. It's not there. There is hatred towards everything Russian. But let me remind you that the main liturgical language in the Russian Orthodox Church is Church Slavonic, and it will be spoken in cathedrals no matter what. It is just a matter of time, and prayers for the Patriarch of Moscow will be lifted again. Not the way they're doing it now, mentioning all other priests of local churches, but they will follow the proper traditional guidelines. Again, it is just a matter of time. Nobody will forgive anything in this respect. This is being written in blood. Many people are giving their lives for that right now, but we must appreciate that and be serious about it, because the religious conflicts the Ukrainian leadership is stoking now are inadmissible. The fact that the international community is silent is a very bad sign for the future. But the good news is that it's revealing the true nature of the West, the bloody West, which, throughout its history, has been profiteering at the expense of other people's suffering and misery, at the expense of other nations, peoples and countries. The West has been conquering other countries, not for the sake of restoring order. Although what has the US to do with order in Europe? I've mentioned the Yugoslavia example already. What has the US sitting across the ocean to do with restoring order and imposing its vision in the Middle East, in Asia? America has no business being in all these countries. The US, however, has a very clear idea about business interests, its own primarily. This country, with NATO in tow, comes for the resources. They realize very well that soon enough there will be a global shortage of resources, of food, of clean water, all the things that Russia has in abundance. That naturally makes Russia a prized asset for the West. Add to that our vast lands. We know the score.
At the same time, our Western partners, so to speak, are trying to propose a so-called Easter ceasefire. We have heard something to this effect from France, and the Vatican keeps trying to insert itself as a peace broker, trying to reach some sort of settlement. How hypocritical are such overtures, given the fact that we know how biased they are? They can hardly be described as disinterested. How absurd are their calls for peace?
Let's leave the Vatican aside for now. I'll say a few things about it later. You've mentioned France. How do you think France can propose peace initiatives if it's a direct participant in the conflict, supplying the Ukrainians with powerful, heavy weaponry?
That's right.
What peace are they bringing? I've been following political developments, and we've recently witnessed President Macron's laughable visit to China. What did he accomplish? China did confirm that it was prepared to contribute to a settlement, but only provided that all countries' interests were taken into account. We need to know what exactly you're proposing to us. Are you suggesting we should stop again and leave dozens or hundreds of thousands of civilians to be devoured by another Nazi regime, so that residential districts can be shelled again? Look at what's going on in Donetsk. It's been more than a year since the launch of the special military operation, and we still can't stop this carnage. Civilians are dying. They are deliberately targeting residential blocks, markets, hospitals, schools. Video proof is available online. All of this is being ignored. So you're absolutely right. This position is hypocritical and pathetic. Whether we're talking about the French president or spokespeople from other European countries who are trying to say something. They have to say something for their voters, so they're saying it. But Mr. Macron had better look at what's going on in his own country, France. How brutally protests over raising the retirement age are being quashed. People are being beaten up. Hundreds and thousands are facing illegal charges. Protesters are being injured. I've recently seen a video of a poor woman being thrown by a special forces officer over his thigh. She landed on the asphalt, and I don't know if she even survived the injury she received. Now, let's go back to the Vatican. First off, the Vatican has not sent anything official regarding this Easter ceasefire. Mr. Peskov confirmed that nothing official has been achieved. The Vatican implies that it has a certain point of contact in Russia, which allegedly is always in touch and ready for a friendly chat over the phone. I personally may have friendly chats with whomever I want, but that's not the official position. In addition, if we look at the Vatican objectively, and the Vatican would like us to see it as objective, we'll see that it has been receiving the so-called victims of Russian aggression and the wives and sisters of the Azov fighters. This ultra-nationalist battalion is famous for its killings and sadistic violence and deserves to face an international tribunal together with other units of the same nature. The Pope receives them, gives them a very warm welcome, drinks tea with them, gives them a pat on the shoulder, pledges his support for Ukrainians, and so on. Again, what I'm saying here is my personal position. Some of my colleagues may disagree with me, but I don't see the Pope as a peacemaker, not in the least bit. Peacemakers don't act like that. Why doesn't the Pope talk to the Italian Prime Minister, for example? Why won't he try to get her to stop arming Ukraine? He doesn't do that. Why is he maniacally trying to push his advice or suggestions onto us that do not really have substance? That's my take.
Going back to the issue of Ukrainian believers, right now around Easter time they are being denied access to many holy places. We've seen outrageous developments around the Kiev-Pечерsk Lavra, with monastery possessions being confiscated for the needs of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The same fate has befallen other places of worship in Kiev, which have been handed over to the Kiev-backed church authorities. What do you think they were trying to accomplish by those crude methods? What's the long-term objective? And is there hope that these holy places will be returned to their rightful owners and will be accessible for churchgoers at some point?
I don't doubt for a second that it will go back to where it should be. The Lord will see to it that justice may triumph. We've already talked about the persecution of the followers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. What corridors of shame they've been forced to go through, like some Ukrainian officials before them, when they were being subjected to the so-called lustration or vetting. Sooner or later, this will end. It will end with the defeat of the Satanist regime. It will end with the return of the Kiev-Pечерsk Lavra and other places of worship which have been illegally seized, and people will once again be able to pray there. Unfortunately, many of them have been destroyed. I wrote about that in my Telegram channel. When it comes to a showdown, there's no guarantee that we won't see something like what Nazi Germany did when it blew up entire historic districts as its troops retreated in Europe. Towns were destroyed. Thousands upon thousands of people were killed. God save us from this massive loss of civilian life. But everything we're seeing now is pointing in this direction. Crowds, mostly young people and minors, are being fed Nazi ideology. And these people, their age notwithstanding, just go ahead and demolish everything in their way. However, sooner or later, they will be stopped, for God cannot be mocked. As people of faith, we believe in the power of the passion and resurrection of Christ. That's why we started our conversation by mentioning that it's Holy Tuesday today. And we can project this story onto Ukraine. As I always say, darkness will always be followed by light, the light of Jesus' resurrection.
As we are getting closer to the Holy Easter Day, which is the main holiday for millions of believers in Russia, Ukraine and around the world, what would you say to them in these trying and challenging times for the Orthodox Church? What's your word of advice for your flock?
I'd like to wish our brothers and sisters patience wherever they are, whatever corner of the world they might be in. We all will celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We all, in one way or another, be one with God. We're going through hard times right now, so each one of us should share this Easter joy as best he can with those who can't experience it fully. According to the news I read yesterday, all churches will be closed for worshippers in Ukraine. One way or another, our Lord will rise. One way or another, he will bring joy to this world for another year. This joy of Easter celebration should help us preserve peace and, most importantly, hope in our souls in these turbulent times.
Thank you for these warm wishes and a very interesting conversation.
Thank you.